Moment. All right, whenever you're ready.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the meeting of the NIAA's Rules, Regulations, and Policies, and we are calling this meeting to order at 9:03. Start with roll call. When I call your name, you could just say here, present. Yeah, Reggie Farmer.
Here.
Cy Frederick.
Here.
Jonathan Grandy. Tammy Habig.
Here.
Jerome Reamer.
Here.
Jim Pace. Ryan Sims.
Here.
Pam Sloan. Rollin Stallworth. Myself. Tim Jackson.
Here.
Paul Anderson.
Here.
Thank you. All right. We're going to open this up for public comment. So this time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. Members of the public who have submitted public comment by email will have their email read into the record. A limit of 3 minutes per person and or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. Tim or Tia, anybody there for public comment?
No, there isn't.
Okay, and there's no one here. I did not receive anything via email. Don't know if any other members have, but I did not receive anything prior to that. So anybody else have any public comment that was not sent to me that needs to be in here? Okay. All right, we will go ahead and move to approve the agenda for the December 6th, 2024 meeting. Looking for a motion for approving today's meeting agenda. May I just ask that it's flexible too, just in case we need to go out of order at all. And I'll jump at it at once.
Jerome Reamer, I'll approve the motion to approve the meeting agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Reggie Farmer, I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, passes.
And Mr. Reamer, this is Paul Anderson. That was to make it also flexible, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And Mr. Farmer, you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yep. All right, moving on to item 5, approval of the October 21st, 2024 meeting minutes are in the pack starting on page 5. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of read through that. That goes over the minutes of what we talked about at the last meeting. Any errors or comments or anything that anybody noticed that needed to be updated based on last meeting before we go to a motion? Okay, looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Cy Frederick, Faith Lutheran.
Thank you. Looking for a second?
Reggie Farmer, I second.
Reggie, all in favor? Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, that passes. Moving on to item 6, which is our possible Nevada administrative codes, the NAC 385B changes that we've been discussing, many of for several meetings. So there is one new one on there that will get the game cancellation that was brought up at another meeting. But the first one is the cooperative teams. So this item we've talked about, we've surveyed, we brought back the survey. I brought all the full survey information the last time we met. And so today, what was asked at our last meeting is that we focus just on the 1A, 2A rule schools and what they felt, since that was really our intent in creating this, was originally for those type of schools. So we wanted to feel them out and kind of see how they felt specifically. So this document that I've included here is the same as we had at our last meeting, as far as just some of the language we had drafted up and put in that survey. The highlighted areas, same as last meeting, which is some additional things to think about that we might want to include if we get to a point where we do want to have a co-op regulation. And then the second part here kind of goes over all the other areas of consideration and the survey questions, basically, that we had sent out. And what you'll see here is now a smaller number for all of these compared to last packet. And these numbers are just our 1A, 2A rule schools. There's no private schools, no charter schools, no 3A schools that are included in this information, to give us a better understanding of really what those schools feel about this. So the first question was about whether or not it should just be public schools or private and charter should be included. So of those public schools, they felt 20 of them felt it should just be public schools. 7 of them are okay with any number of schools, private or charter, to be included in this regulation. The second question was really the question to focus on here, and this is whether or not you supported it. So there were 3 options here, whether you felt that you would support it, including those schools that choose to go on co-op to have the option to compete in the postseason, or that you support it, but they're not postseason eligible, or that you're not in support of co-op. So those were the 3 options. So of the 27 rural schools that answered the survey, 10 of them said yes, 100%, and you can be postseason eligible if you choose to do a co-op. 7 said we're in support, but no postseason. So that's 17 of the 27, and then 10 were not in support. So is it overwhelming? No, 17 to 10. I mean, I'm not a statistician, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but it's not something, that's screaming, absolutely, we all want this. So I don't know, that's really where I think we have this discussion is, do we feel that this is something that we want to move forward? The rest of them are just specifics on if we do the co-op regulation, we wanted assistance in how we think that should be written and, what would work best there. So you can look at the answers to those if we decide to move forward. But I think today we really need to discuss if we're moving forward with this or not. We have the data, we've surveyed the schools, and we need to make a call on whether or not we move forward with it. So I'm gonna just open it up for conversation, discussion, what we get out of this, and where we feel we should go next.
I have a question. What do those numbers look like with regards to this being a request, Kate? I know over the years there's been a few of these, but this hasn't been something that has been one of these earth-shattering movement type things that we see. I think it comes out every couple of years with a school or two. Could you update us on that?
Yeah, and obviously I'm coming in this summer, so I don't have the history here, so I don't know if anybody else, if Paul, if any schools have requested this prior. This came from one school I know, and I believe the 2023 fall Board of Control meeting is when it originally came in this part of our conversation. I don't know in the past. And then we've talked about it kind of throughout different committee meetings and board meetings, but it was always just one school/school district that in this initial, conversation that we're having here was involved.
This is Paul Anderson, legal counsel. It initiated, I think, Rollins, you recall, the Colville initiated it, because of their concerns. And I think that's where it all started. There may have been some talk years ago about it, but most recently that's where it started, just in the last year or two.
And I know that there was some talk, I want to say either last year or maybe the start of this year, about Wattell and what their football program or something like that came up about co-oping with possibly Douglas High School. I know that had come up, and this is kind of somewhat related to this, but again, you're talking, this specifically addresses a 1A, 2A issue, and I believe those two schools were involved, are 2A, 3, 4A, something along those lines. So I know that's the last I've heard of it, so.
And Jim is here. I don't know if he has any history on that with Wittel, but yeah, that wouldn't even having a small school wanting to just have their kids have the opportunity to participate at a larger school if they can't offer it. That's not even addressed in this in our initial proposal here
Yes.
because yeah.
Yes.
So but yeah, if Jim, if you know anything about that, you can chime in too. But I only know about school.
Yeah, I'm new enough here that I don't know if it was something in the past, but yeah, I just don't think it logistically, at least for us, I don't see how that would ever work.
With another 1A, 2A school.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, just kind of digesting some of this information that we got back from the survey.
Kind of agree with you, Kate. Like there's no overwhelming. I feel like for us to move forward with something, I feel like it has to be like a pretty big majority.
Well, is Colville the only one that would be interested in doing it? If they could even find somebody to do it with, because I know
Right,
Spring Valley's not interested, so.
Yeah, that was the discussion at the board meeting, the one board meeting that we had, and Dave Vick made it pretty clear that Smith Valley wouldn't even be interested in talking with them about it. And so it was primarily at Colville. I don't recall any other small community bringing that up.
I don't either.
And I do remember the discussion about Douglas, Wittel kids potentially going down and playing at Douglas. And I think that kind of was shot down, that wouldn't be the purpose of this. It's more to take care of rural communities.
Right.
So,
And I think,
yeah.
I think they were also worried that if they didn't have that option, they were going to start losing kids, I think is what her biggest.
They were worried about them going over to South Tahoe, which you have
That's
to
what
do
it was.
all the
Yeah.
time anyway, Jim, right?
Right. They're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And it also, I mean, I feel like for some they can because of their distances, but some of them they can't because they're just too far away.
I would
Right,
say
so we may have schools that say that they're in support, but they don't even have a possibility of doing.
Of doing it because they're logistically just too far away.
Mhm.
Well, and Tammy, I was gonna chime in on that. I mean, you look at the way across the state,
Yeah.
go over to the east. I mean, I'll use West Wendover as an example. I mean, we're 50 miles to the closest town,
Yeah.
120 to everybody else. Who's gonna want to travel to us, or, are we gonna send kids to another school? That's a lot of burden on the parents in regards to travel, and keeping up with that type of scheduling and stuff. So I think it works a little bit better for the west side of the state, but the east side, just for how spread out we are, it just kind of makes it tougher.
You know,
I think it consider. Go ahead, Paul.
where the co-op thing has really worked is in the Midwest and places like that have a lot of small, farming communities or whatever that are fairly close to one another. They may be 5 miles apart or something like that. And each one's its own separate school district and whatnot. And so that's where it's worked out. But, Nevada is a whole different story. Like you all say, the distance is just too great in most places.
So do we have to, like, if we don't want to do anything with this, do we just let it go or what do we have to do?
I think
Yeah.
Kate, the recommendation back to the board would be that we've studied it and we don't feel that it's worth for the board to continue to pursue.
Yeah, I think here, I mean, we can have a motion, specifically to say that we are not going to move forward if that's the direction we want to go in, and then we can share that information with the board, or we can just end the conversation and not, there's no motion and then we don't move forward either. So either one works. A couple other points I just want to bring up, kind of piggyback on Paul's point is I agree that it works in certain states. And so people see that, like, yeah, other states are doing it, but the logistics are definitely different. We have a very large, widespread, state. I came from a small town where we did this, but like he was saying, our schools were 5 minutes apart. We were just all different school districts. So we just were able to do it that way. So I think the logistics is very difficult here. And even those schools that are interested may not have the option, which also kind of creates an inequity if we do say, hey, well, why don't we just allow the schools that do want to do it let's just create it because you only have to do it if you want to do it. But that could create that inequity of maybe our western side of the state schools have a better opportunity to do this where our eastern side don't, and they want to, but they just don't have that opportunity. So what we don't want to do is create a regulation that's going to create any inequities across the state. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that. But yeah, any other thoughts, things to consider with this?
Just the last thing is if we don't make any motion, there's no ruling on this. It doesn't prevent a school from requesting to do this in 2 years, does it?
No, it can always be brought back,
Okay.
to the board or,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. But I don't think we should get into the practice as a association to come up with regulations that would only impact 1 or 2% of the state school. I think that's one of those things that if we do that, then we'll have thousands and thousands of regulations. So I think this should just be moved on.
Okay. Anybody else for the good of the order on this? All right, so I will open it up for a motion. If there is anybody that would like to make a motion, give it a couple beats here, and if not, then we will move on to the next point. Anybody interested in making a motion on this piece? Okay, so at this point, we've exhausted all of the points of what we wanted to do and the data that we wanted to gather with this. And, if anything new comes up down the road, we will obviously re-entertain it. But at this point, I don't feel there's an overwhelming, need for this in our state. And we'll move on to the next item then. Taking a look at the next page, page 11, you'll see NAC 385B 710, which is our age regulation. This is the same language that was in our last packet. And at our last meeting, we basically said it's likely that we need to move in this direction because if you look at all the Section 7 schools, they all have some language about when a student turns 19. And it's not vastly different than what we have. It would just be moving that point back a little bit from what we currently have because now students can be 19 and participate. And then when they turn 20 in that season, they're ineligible. So our current rule basically will allow some students that are older 19-year-olds to participate, where in other states, they're only able to participate at 19 when they're a little bit on the younger end. So it's just kind of moving the needle a bit here. It's not making a huge difference. If we do come up with a regulation that sets a date for when they turn 19, we're basically just solidifying that you cannot participate if you've been held back at some point twice, essentially, is really what we're doing here, which I think is fair enough. So every student will still be allowed to be 19 during their senior year and participate. They just will have likely only been held back at one point during their schooling, if that makes sense. So this was the language from California, Arizona, Utah, and Hawaii. They, are a little bit more simple in their terms as far as how they write the regulation. So it's easy to understand what we have going on. Ours will probably be written a little bit more in like legal jargon, but we can talk about this a little bit further if we feel that we want to move in this direction. I think at our last meeting we did. And we really just wanted to look at this as what date makes the most sense for us here is I think kind of where we left off the conversation. And we can kind of draft that now if we feel that's the direction we want to go in. So just opening that up for conversation. Again, up top is our current regulation where basically when you turn 20, anytime in that season, you cannot participate. So our older 19-year-olds are participating in Nevada.
So what do we have to do at this point? Is recommend it to go to the board?
Yeah, so if we want
Okay.
to move forward with changing that, we'll basically draft up some language or at least just get a date, and then Paul and I can work more logistically on the language. But if we come to a consensus that we want to make a motion on changing this particular regulation, making a cutoff date for 19, then it will go to workshop at the next Board of Control meeting, which I would have to get out super fast because we need 30 days. And then the board would make their vote just like we do on any regulation change.
Like as far as the date, a lot of the Arizona, Utah, and Hawaii all have that September 1st. I know in Clark County, our date for cutoff is August 1st. So
August
for us,
1st.
it would make sense to line it up with that August 1st, because then that stays consistent with our district. I don't know if other districts in the state have the same age date for their kindergarten cutoff, or how that would work to want to be consistent in the state, or if we want to go September 1st to be consistent with Section 7.
Thoughts on that? Washoe, do you know, Rollins for Washoe, what your date is?
No, I'll have to go and check, but no, I don't know the specific date. I think we have always used what's written in the NIAA regulations.
Oh, no, I mean for like your kindergarten. Like, do you know what your Washoe kindergarten?
It's August 1st. I'm looking at their website right now.
August 1st? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I
agree
just
with
looked it up
that.
too.
Probably go with August 1st.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's a familiar date. I think it is pretty state consistent. I think. I don't even know. I'm pretty sure it's pretty consistent across the state. But if others here in other school districts have different dates, feel free to share that just so that we can be, as fair and equitable across the board to make the most sense for the whole state.
Kate, I'm looking at it. It looks like it went statewide August 1st, sometime in 2023.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Assembly Bill 65 went into effect July 1st, 2023.
You said 65 or 165?
65. 65.
Okay.
The new law aims to ensure that the entire state is on the same page as school start dates
What I thought.
vary. Previously, children could start school as long as they turn 5 by September 30th. So they rolled it back to August 1st.
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, I think that makes the most sense, making it a date that's already statewide.
Yeah.
So essentially, we would just have to reword, I guess, subsection 1 here. And again, Paul and I can work on this more specifically, but just updating this to say, a pupil's 19th birthday occurs, prior to August 1st, yada, 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 similar to what the other schools have. So I guess the date was really the biggest part, and turning 19 by this date was the biggest part that we wanted to kind of hash out here. The rest of it, I think, is fine. That doesn't make any difference, to the regulation. It's just that subsection 1. So other thoughts on this? Anybody have anything else that they want to share?
So just to clarify, like what we're saying or what we're sending to the board basically is saying that they cannot turn 20 at any point in the year. They can play through
Correct.
19, but they can't turn 20 at any point in the year.
Yep.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure I was
Yeah.
agreeing
just-
to what I thought I was agreeing.
Yeah. It's really just moving that needle back just a bit so that our oldest 19-year-olds aren't getting an extra last fall or winter season.
Winter sport, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm confused because I thought that's not what it was saying. Because that's what our regulation currently states, that at any point you turn 20.
At any point you turn 20, they should not be allowed to participate during that season.
That's what our
During
regulation.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the
during that
regulation,
season.
but the regulation right now says that like if they turn 20 December 1st, they can play football that year. What
As-
we're saying is if you turn 20 at any point that year, you
You're-
can't play because then we don't give football and basketball and all the winter and fall sports an advantage over spring.
Okay, copy.
Right? Am I right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Mhm.
I just wanted to make sure because that's what I feel strongly about. So I wanted to make
It's,
Better than
it's to
I-
create equity across all the sports because of course
Exactly.
your fall's going to have advantage over winter's going to have advantage over spring's going to be out of luck to ever have those older kids participating. We're really just talking about older 19-year-olds. So now those older 19-year-olds are not getting that opportunity because they've turned 19 too late. Had to turn 19, before this date.
And another way to look at it, if it makes more sense in people's heads, us people who have kids, right, who, doing an extra year of kindergarten is a common thing.
Mhm.
Any kid who's done an extra year of kindergarten is going to turn 19 at the end of their senior year. If you've done an extra year of kindergarten and an extra year of 8th grade, you're going to turn 20 at the end of your senior year, typically. I mean, I'm not saying it's always at the end of your senior year, but so any kid who's held back twice essentially is turning 20. Any kid who's held back once is turning 19, which once is a common occurrence across the country in regards to, academic maturity, social maturity, those kind of things. There's a lot of studies out there that show some students turning 15 going into high school is better. So I think that's why a lot of states have done that, is because it's not a uncommon thing to hold your kid back for a year, but 2 years is becoming a thing and it's a little bit excessive.
Exactly. And that was really what we wanted to hit here is we understand that parents are going to make those calls, especially in the younger grades, and we don't want to penalize that. So we don't want to, put anything more stringent than this in there, but this allows that one holdback at some, but that 8th grade holdback, if it's the second time, is now going to be dinged. It's not going to protect us from those that didn't need to hold their kid back for any academic reason at any point and then choose to hold them back in 8th grade. We're not going to attack that here, but that's okay. And that's what, the board has decided not to move forward with other regulations that could possibly handle that concern. This regulation is really just helping us with the 2 years of being held back.
And keep in mind, everyone, that, you're creating these recommendations for the board and, with the idea that the board will approve them. And any parent can still appeal, a ruling like this. So if there's somebody whose kid does turn 20 and they got extraordinary circumstances, they can appeal that. And then that would be determined through the hearing process.
Correct. We've had those cases, right? We've had kids have to take a whole year off of school because they were diagnosed with cancer, and then they came back and now they're old. So yes, they should be allowed to appeal it.
Right.
Same with a 5th-year senior, extenuating circumstances for a 5th-year senior would be the same thing as this regulation. So yeah, there's always an opportunity. That's a great point, Paul. Any other discussion?
As long as that's what it says, I'm good.
And again, like I said, Paul and I will draft it, but essentially what we're looking at is saying, any student whose birthday is prior to August 1st, it will be ineligible to participate in sports and go on with the rest of that sentence, basically. So that will be essentially what that language will say. Very similar to the rest of our. So just looking for a possible motion if anybody would like to move forward with a motion for this.
I think Randy, Clark County School District, I'll make a motion to update NAC 385B 710 to 19th birthday, August 1st or prior.
Good job, Grande. I'll second.
All right, and Tammy seconds. Any other discussion on this? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that update to that regulation passes. I will work with Paul to get it drafted appropriately, and then we will put that on a workshop for the January meeting. All things happen in time because it has to be out 30 days. So I should be able to get that done and be on the agenda for that meeting. All right. Moving on to page 12, regulation NEC 385B.306, referring to game cancellations. So this was brought up in our membership committee meeting. For those of you that are in that meeting and kind of have the background on this, basically it was asked that we consider what our penalties are for teams that are just blatantly missing games, canceling games last minute, causing costs on other schools, transportation, officials, security, all the things that go along with hosting an event. It has come up a couple times. It was brought up at the Board of Control meeting. We'll be discussing this too in that membership committee meeting, but it was asked that the Rules and Regulations Committee also take a look at it. So kind of the more eyes on it and the more conversation around it, better, just so that we can kind of get all our thoughts about this and possible changes or additions that we would like to make to this regulation. So essentially, I mean, you can kind of read through it. Basically just says you can't cancel a game, and that's pretty much it. Like, you can't cancel a game unless, you get that approval from the executive director. And we know that that's not necessarily happening in a lot of these cases. It's happening kind of last minute.
And these are going to address the ones where like the schools just don't show up, like they don't say anything. Okay.
Yeah, we're not talking, there's a situation that occurs and you give plenty of time to that school to make the adjustments. And this is like where all of a sudden you're sitting there and the team is not there and the game's just been canceled. So yeah, the getting, a school should not cancel a game without the approval. The approval would be having that conversation ahead of time with the scheduling, entity, whoever that may be, that this is happening prior to kind of the day of the game occurring. So really, this is just open to conversation to start it, because we haven't really talked about this at all. If there's things that we want to add, penalties for this, membership issues, just anything that you kind of feel to go along with those situations where teams are leaving each other kind of out to dry.
Right now, oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Rollins.
Right now, is there any penalty in place, fines or anything in place when that happens?
There is not currently. We do have the ability to fine schools for violations of regulations, but because we don't really necessarily, I mean, we could, but we haven't been, but we could technically say you're in violation of 306 because you've canceled a game without approval. We have not implemented that though. So that's kind of part of the conversation is, do we just be a little bit more strict on this regulation and we fine them for violating this regulation? Kind of more procedural. How do we want to handle this situation? We might not even need to make a new regulation or change to it. We could just enforce this regulation a little bit more strictly.
I just think it needs to be enforced.
I do too. I've finally been on the end of this where a game was canceled and concessions was, hot dogs were prepared and referees were here and everybody was here and the team no-showed and we called and oh, we forgot to get the bus. And it was like, wow. So it really, I didn't realize how much of a pain it is to have a game canceled till you have one canceled on you. So I do think we need to do something. And if finding a heavy fine is what we need to enforce, then I think we start there because it does really, not let alone the kids didn't get to play, but all the other things that were in place that I didn't even think about.
Okay.
Well, and remember, our department will have to pay the official if the game is canceled. If the officials show up to the site, we are obligated to pay them whether the game is canceled or not. And the only time we wouldn't pay them if they were notified, I want to say within 24 hours before the scheduled game and it was canceled, then we wouldn't have to pay. But when there's situations where officials show up at a game and the school decides on their own to just cancel the game based on whatever right before the actual start of the game time, we still have to pay for those officials if they showed up.
So Kate, this is Paul. Here's what I was thinking. You've always got the ability to sanction under our rules that allow for sanctioning, but as both Reggie and Rollins are stating, we ought to, if the amount that you can sanction isn't sufficient to cover the costs that are incurred by the school that's hosting and where the team didn't show, I think we ought to be able to, find them in that amount at least, right? And so that school, if it's a private school or charter or whatever, could be reimbursed, or that school district can be reimbursed for the costs that it incurred. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So what I was thinking is if we
Yeah.
added language, any violation, this is just off the top of my head, any violation of the rule would be subject to the NIA's, whatever the regulation is dealing with sanctions, in an amount equal to, costs incurred by the hosting school or something along those lines. I mean, that's just really rough language, but just kind of my thought.
Yeah, and I would almost go as far as to say just not even the hosting school, because you got to think there's also situations where a school does show up to a school thinking that they're the away team, that a game's going to happen and that no one's there, and they got a cost for a bus too. So I would even maybe extend it to just be the opponent.
Yeah.
Just so that it's covered both ways, because I'm sure it's happened once or twice the opposite way too. You show up and the other team's not ready to host you.
Right. So it'd be like the non-violating party would be entitled to reimbursement.
I love it. That's really good.
Other thought?
With that, like Reggie mentioned, or Rollins, the timeline, and we need 24-hour notice. Do we want to put a time in there that it has to be? Because I called you at 3:00, so you knew that there wasn't going to be a game at 5, but we still have those costs in that. So I don't know if we want to do like a 24 or 48-hour, 1 business day, 2 business day.
Well, I think 1 business day is pretty sufficient in terms of a schedule is already made. The officials already know where they're going and all that. If they're able to know 24 hours before their event, then they could either reschedule and go work somewhere else, or they know that they have the day off or whatever. But I think 48 and anything sooner than that is too soon, because situations do happen. You have a flooding in the gym that takes place, and it just takes place 24 hours before the game. That does it. And I tell you what, there should be some kind of verbiage in there that states that unforeseen situations such as a flooding that takes place at noon and the game has to be canceled in the gym. Well, we understand that, and the official association would understand that too as well. It's my understanding in listening to some of these situations is teams just didn't want to play. I mean, there's a big difference between a team and a coach not just wanting to play because they're going to get their butt kicked, or they just want to take some time off, they didn't practice, whatever the case may be. Those are the types of situations where we want to be able to penalize the school and the coach for doing that.
Yeah, I think
that's a great point, Rollins. The unexpected facility things are out of our control, but the last minute injury cancellations, the last minute eligibility on Monday, we thought they'd be good.
Yeah.
Those ones aren't cool. And with some of them, within CCSD, we can cancel our buses within about 12 hours and not charge the schools.
Yes.
But a lot of the privates and charters, if they're using charter companies, they need to, and even us, we have to use charters for sometimes. And if we don't give them 24 or 48-hour notice, we're still getting charged $500 for that charter bus.
Exactly. And I didn't even think about the buses involved in this. I was really thinking more about the officials getting in their car, leaving, and trying to get to the game. But those are all the issues why this needs to be addressed and put on paper so that schools know that, hey, when they do that, they're going to pay for all of those fees that are incurred by that hosting school and their payment as well.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the unforeseen circumstances thing, we could probably add language that is similar to things that we have in our regulations, where it just says, this could be waived at the discretion of the executive director. Obviously, if there's a circumstance that he deems it was necessary for that to be canceled, then it doesn't mean that you have to, be fined for that. So I think we can add that language, no problem.
Yes.
So Kate, let's go a step further. A school is fined, whatever it is. They don't pay the fine and they move to the next season. What are our recourse when schools don't pay the fines?
When they don't pay the fines, we have a regulation that basically we can continue to sanction them, because if they're not paying a fine based on a regulation, we can continue to sanction them in other ways, and it could affect their membership. So there's definitely avenues for us to continue disciplinary action. We've done that in cases where, a fine wasn't paid on time and then they got a heftier fine and then it escalates to higher up. So there's definitely avenues for that, that we could, entertain.
Yeah, I think it also includes there's things that we can do in terms of impacting their schedule for next year, the next season, taking games away from them and those kind of things. So there are avenues that the NIAA can use to penalize the school if they don't, oh, well, we're just not going to pay it. Well, okay, then you can only play, we're going to take 4 games, non-league games away from you on your season the following year.
So Kate, I got some just very rough proposed language
Perfect.
that we could add, just saying, and this can change obviously, but it'd just be like absent extraordinary circumstances, a school who cancels a game, contest, or meet without providing a minimum of 24 hours notice to its opponent, maybe sanctioned in accordance with NAC 385B, whatever the sanction reg is, or in an amount equal to the costs incurred by the opponent.
Yep.
That's not something, I mean, we have to flesh that out a bit, but that,
Yeah.
I thought.
So just a quick question regarding the fine, would it be, we kind of know what officials get charged for that. And then if we're saying that the school is, the concession stand, different things that the school puts together for the game, is there going to be like an add-on to that? So are we saying there's going to be an actual number, or is it in the regulation, is it just going to say a fine and then that has to be worked out with the school, or how does that work with the language?
I think we could say a fine, and then we can sort of, I guess, go beyond that and define, the hard costs, for the school, the team that didn't violate, which would be what, transportation costs, officials, getting into snack bar and stuff like that's probably getting a little too far, maybe. But that's what I would envision.
Well, I was just following up with Reggie on the hot dogs. I just don't want those to go to waste.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, do we want to say like there's a fine to the NIAA for canceling the game and any amount cost, and then there's also a separate check that gets sent to the opponent for the cost of that, and maybe that just gets flushed out. We can't really, I don't think, put like a specific number in there, but that gets flushed out between the NIAA and the school as to what that fine will be.
That's where I guess, a fine, the non-violating school could submit their costs,
their hot dog fees and nacho cheese
to
and all the
the
things.
executive director, who then would make a determination.
Okay. That's good.
Hey, just so before we go down this path though, Paul, I'm looking at the regs. 960 does, if I'm not mistaken, we might be having to look at a different reg change as well, because I think we have a cap on what we can fine a school. And trust me, I've talked to Kate about this. I do believe these need to be addressed because those fines were implemented, some of them as far back as 2004 and 2011. We need to adjust those, but we just from past experience, if you have a football game, you can hit $1,000 pretty quick.
Sure.
And so we might have to look at increasing those fines, because some of them say not more than 2,500. Some say this, but I mean, there's up to 5,000. So maybe we also should address that at the same time, Kate.
Yeah, and I don't know, since we're fining, because I know those numbers, there's like 3 different numbers that are listed in 960. So if we're fining the school as the NIAA to ourselves, is that what that's saying? Because then in this regulation, we can specify this is just a bill essentially to the opponent. Does it need to follow the fining at 960, since it's a new regulation that's has its own dollar amount it's kind of ambiguous?
Well, that's why I kind of said initially that it would be in accordance with NAC 385B. I didn't have the number, but Tim's got it down 960. And I think we changed the language that would be the fine owed to the NIAA.
Thank you.
Plus additional costs, payable to
Snyder
the
not out there in
the
there?
opponent.
Tammy, you're
Okay,
not on mute.
cause I'm on a meeting, so I can't really.
I'll tell him she did wait up there.
Yeah,
I don't have the ability to mute her. Sorry, Tammy. Can you hear us? Oh, there you go. Okay, you're good, Paul. Go ahead.
So, I guess we could change this language so that it's clear that the fine is in whatever amount is specified in 385B 960 that you feel is appropriate, and then the additional amount would be, actual costs incurred by the opponent, the non-canceling opponent or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like we would be okay if it's two separate things, right? We're finding them based on this regulation in compliance with that, but then we're also adding that you're gonna be billed for the cost of that game to that opponent. I think keeping it separate like that, I feel like we'd be okay.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on this?
So just real quick with the costs of the schools, would that be something that the executive director would have to look at? And, going back to the hot dogs and nacho fees, but like for workers that are, for a football game, you're doing chain gang, you got the scoreboard, stuff like that. That would be the most important part of, returning funds to a school to help out with that. So would that be something that we'd have to write in as language to that, or would that be something that the executive director could, approve or disapprove line items for that school?
Yeah, I put a little line in there that Paul kind of said was with an amount of the cost, the cost to the opponent as determined or as reviewed by the executive director. So I definitely Tim would kind of have the final call on that. He'd review, you kind of submit that all to him and review that to make sure, because it's also sometimes going to go to a school district versus a school too. So it's where it's even going might be different, and some of it might go to a school and the school district. So, I think the logistics of the amount and who it's going to and all that, I don't know if the specifics have to really be in there, but it just basically needs to be vetted by the executive director and then determined on the amount and where it's going.
So maybe what we could do is just work on the language and bring it back to the next meeting of this group. The proposed language for final approval to go to the board or something like that, Kate. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and like I said, the membership committee was originally asking to bring it up, and I think it's important to bring it back to them too, because they wanted us to look at it, maybe draw up some language and then bring it back to them to kind of go back and forth between the committees before we even go to the board. So I think if we can at least let them know the conversation we're having and see if there's other points that they want to bring in, because that meeting's next Wednesday, I can add in any of that language and then we can propose some language to bring back to both of those committees before going to the board. So there's no rush in this. This was just something that was brought up, and I thought, it's been important. It's been brought up at board meetings too. So I wanted to make sure both committees had a chance to kind of work on some language for it. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? All right, I'll offer a motion if somebody feels they want to motion something with this. My suggestion is that we just bring it back to future meetings and the other committee for discussion, but I will open that up in case anybody did want to make a motion on it. All right, we're going to move forward to item 7. I'm just going to go back up to the agenda. I don't have any documents for these. These were 2 items, 7 and 8, that we had brought up, I think, the meeting before last, actually, that were just items that we wanted to discuss. So the first is CIT, so children in transition / homeless pupils, different districts and schools call it different things, Title I, all of that, McKinney-Vento. And so the conversation Rollins had brought up was just, do we need to look at the eligibility of these students? There has been some issues in our larger school districts with possibly some manipulation of using this law to gain athletic eligibility. And, is there a cause for discussion here? So I'll open this up just kind of to Rollins first, if you wanted to talk on it. Anybody else? I know Grandy had some information that he shared with me that I think would be important to talk about, because we're not the only state that's seeing some issues with this. So Rollins, I'll open it up to you first to just kind of open that conversation if you want. He's available. Oh, it looks like he's on the phone,
I
so.
was gonna say, it looks like he's on the phone.
All right, Grandy, do you want to talk about what that article you shared with me? Because that's kind of the issue we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's part of it. So Virginia High School Association right now is dealing with a big issue from Fairfax County, and I've got this because my sister works in the county as a guidance counselor. Couple of complicated things. One, they had a coach transition from one high school to another high school, and then a number of athletes followed. So they obviously don't have any Oregon rule things there. But as they've been going throughout the season, they found out a number of the transfers were not legit transfers, big surprise. And as they're getting further into the investigation, a number of them have been transferred under homelessness. So now they're trying to figure out what they can do with that. And there's a big uproar. And my sister, as a guidance counselor, there's big pushback because those kids that declare homelessness are receiving funds, or the school at least is receiving additional funds for those kids. But now it was a false claim of homelessness. So what type of fines or penalties should be imposed on that? And it's a case where they now know that these were used improperly for transfer purposes. Long story short, they were banned from playoffs. The court reinstated them, and then a week later, the school, after more information came out, decided to withdraw from the playoffs because it's so messy. The athletic director resigned. He's moving out of country. Like, it's crazy. But it's going on in other places where. And it's hard because you want to believe, we know so many of, especially in Las Vegas, and I know Washoe is similar. So many of our families are in transit and are having so many problems that it's almost not fair to those ones who are legitimately in that others are abusing it. And because with that, yes, we have, our concern at the athletic purposes. And I'm arguing with my sister. My sister's like, no, like, it's the funding. Like, those kids are taking funds from other families who should have it as well. So how do we do that? And it's hard. And Kate knows what we deal with here. We have our own Title I office. And I was on the phone with Kelly Jo yesterday, and our burden of proof that we want is different than what our Title I office wants. So how can we do have codes or guidelines on what we can ask for that vary a little bit? One of the things I know we ask for that I get pushback now and again is if a family's new to Title I or new to homelessness, then we still want a document of abandonment from their previous. If they got evicted, the eviction notice. Our Title I, and I found out talking to our Title I office, they don't require that. The family just has to go in and say we were evicted, and they take the family's word for it. And then we go back and we do property searches and all this stuff, and it shows that they're still there or still owners or all sorts of things. So it's hard because you do, and we know we have kids in these situations, but we also know people are abusing that, especially when they find out, and last year I argued with Kate on one because we had a kid who was denied Title I just because the person he was staying with answered the questions wrong. He was clearly homeless. He hasn't been with his mother in 5 years, but the family member he was staying with told Title I that he's cared for, so therefore they didn't grant him homelessness. And then you have other kids who just answer the questions right when they call the office, so they're Title I without any documentation or proof. Whereas I had documentation that this kid has been at 5 houses in 6 years, and he's not declared homeless because they answered the questions wrong. So how do we put guidelines in? And I think we all have to work with our title. Each district has a Title I coordinator in that. So we got to work with that as well. That's my vent.
I know,
all good.
John, I agree. I agree because Kate and I had a similar one last year where I knew the kid was lying, but because our Title I office has a very low threshold in CCSD, it's very easy for people to manipulate the system, and it's not it's being readily done now, and it's increasing.
And I know with that Virginia thing, what they found out is some of the people that declared Title I to go to this other school within the county, then they're seen driving their Mercedes Benz to their $1 million home back in the other zone. So it's like, ugh.
Yeah, and it's happening here. It's definitely happening here, and I feel like it's getting more and more Because they know now.
Yeah.
That we can't really question it.
Yeah, and Rollins and I and Lori last year looked at the McKinney-Vento like actual law. And it basically says we do have to allow them athletic participation, but it doesn't say anything about we're not allowed to ask any question. Like we use, professional, your professional, what I'm trying to say, like don't judgment, exactly.
Sure.
Professional judgment on like
Or
how deep
integrity.
you're gonna dig and but don't, we can still ask some questions like what's the nature of this hardship? They still should be able to just generally speak about some of the things that are going on. And if it's something like an eviction, that's something they can easily prove and show. And that shouldn't be asking too much in those situations. So part of it is there are some questions we can ask. There's a limit in some cases where we might get to a dead end because it could be a certain homelessness situation where there isn't going to be paperwork or something to prove it. Is one piece. And we definitely can ask if it's a new situation for something to show that they're no longer at their previous address or something like that. We can dig into some of these. But some are going to be difficult. So I know I had one where family claimed that their house had flooded. And, we tried to verify that in every way that we could and just, determine, okay, well, how long does this need to get fixed? And then you're just going to go back into that house. And there's just certain situations where like we understand, like, yes, you could be homeless due to something like that. But is this a matter of athletic purposes and is that homelessness going to be fixed sometime during that year? And part of the problem too, in like CCSD is they get that status for the whole year, regardless if they then get a house, they're good to go. So they also know that piece, I think, and they'll say, oh yeah, my house flooded, but I'm back in a week because we had the insurance company fix it and we're all good to go, or whatever the case may be. But I got that homeless status. Now I can go to school over here once I'm back in my house, in the other zone. So there's other things to kind of consider there too.
Yeah, and just so you guys are aware, like even if the family contacts Title I and CCSD and says, "Hey, we're no longer homeless. I have a residence," they don't remove them. They leave them on for the whole year. Like I just had one yesterday that yes, they got a house now. They were at a school homelessness in August and September. Now they have an apartment, and their status stays. Even though the family's like, no, we're not homeless anymore. We're good.
Does the legality part of it, like I understand that we have to grant them athletic eligibility, but does it have to be varsity eligibility?
It doesn't say that in McKinney-Vento, and I think that's part of the conversation that Rollins and I had last year, and why he wanted to bring this up is maybe we just leave it at you get JV if you're homeless because you're not meeting the residency requirement, right? And or possibly the guardianship side of it. Sometimes they're unaccompanied youth. So maybe that's a piece of it to kind of curb some of the misuse is that we are giving you athletic eligibility. It's not full varsity. But then we run into, can they use their one-time transfer to get it too? And like, now we're going down that rabbit hole. So, that's definitely a possibility.
Well, I think the reality in my experience in doing this is that if a kid is claiming CIT status and they are demanding varsity eligibility, then it's being done based on athletic participation. If a kid becomes CIT and you tell them, okay, you can go and you can play lower levels, case closed, and we move on, it doesn't seem to be related to a recruiting aspect. So the only issues that we have ever had are 9th and 10th graders or 10th and 11th graders all of a sudden becoming CIT so that they can be on a varsity team at another school. And so I really think that if we just fight to continue to give them athletic eligibility at the lower levels, you'll see a decrease in the number of actual cases of kids being transferred over for athletic purposes. And I know that for a fact because the statistics show that out of our 119 CIT kids over the last 2 years, out of that 119 kids, only 7 or 8 of those kids basically were kids that were actually only being CIT kids for athletic purposes when we investigated and found out. And we were somewhat successful in 6 out of the 7 cases to to get the kid ineligible athletically, even though they were CIT kids. And so we can do a little bit more than the actual, because I'm sure we're just like Clark County. We have a CIT agency that basically they go and they fight for those kids to go wherever they want to go, or they send them to, and they fight for those kids to have that athletic eligibility, and that creates a major conflict between two departments in the same school district fighting against each other for kids' eligibility. And they look at it as though, oh, that kid has the right to be an athlete. And we're saying, yeah, they do. They just don't have the right to be a varsity athlete. We're not taking athletics away from them, but we are taking that element of recruiting away from the coach and the school and outside forces trying to get that kid and parents to finagle the system to become quote unquote CIT for varsity purposes. So if we make it JV only or lower levels only, then I think we really take that element of recruiting out of the picture for us, and it becomes a little cleaner transition.
How do we deal with our seniors though? Is that disproportionately affecting them in a negative way, because they're not going to have that option and they may actually, because my thought was we say JV, but you can appeal with a full hardship. You have to provide all the documentation, you got to let us dig if you want full, but I still feel like that may be a little bit more difficult for a senior than they're required to do the hardship if they want any eligibility, but just a thought.
Well, the thing I love about that aspect is that the hardship could still be requested by a senior or somebody wanting to play varsity, but it opens the door for us to investigate and ask those questions that we need to ask. Whereas our people are saying right now in our departments here, we can't ask that question. Well, what opens the door is if we come up with some kind of a policy from an NIAA standpoint that says CIT kids have and can be granted athletic eligibility at the lower levels, which complies with the what's the case?
McKinney-Vento.
Yes,
so
case.
My only concern with that is, are we in violation of McKinney-Vento? Because we're technically saying, if we're only giving JV, a senior that is CIT isn't eligible because they can't play JV. So my only concern is that.
Well, the verbiage could be a senior who's requesting CIT will be, they can apply for a hardship, which opens up the door for us to investigate it. Because if they have to explain their hardship, now we can go ahead and our department can go ahead and do the investigation to provide the eligibility or not for that senior.
And I don't know, there's a for Kate and Paul, would we be able to add to kind of like our shared housing is where if it's been established for over 180 school days, then okay. And then, I mean, you have a kid, I had a couple yesterday who had 6 years, they've been titled, child in transit and moving 3 or 4 schools. So those ones, but again, they're for multiple years and every year reapplying with that. It's not like this is brand new. I'm applying for it. So, if it's new, I think we would go the hardship route. And if it's 180 school days or longer, then you just like the shared housing in the same house, you kind of say, okay.
You've established, that address.
This is Paul. One of the things I think we need to do is really look at it from the legal aspect. And Rollins, maybe has Washoe's legal department done that from the standpoint of the issue Kate brought up, like a senior, if you were to say, hey, you're not automatically eligible if you're CIT without, going through a hardship. Have they looked at that at all as to whether we could do that or not?
Oh, they haven't looked at it yet, but my guess would be that if that did go to our legal, they would say, no way, that kid should be automatically eligible to participate. That's what our legal would say. And I've also given our legal, because I went to a Vento conference a year ago. When I went to that conference, I brought brought back documentation from the actual Vento document that does state that athletic departments and school districts do have the right to investigate athletic eligibility.
So if that's the case, I mean, if that's the law under McKinney-Vento, then I'd be comfortable with that. But I just want to make sure that that is, so that's why.
Well, I'll send you what I have, because there's a section in there that states that school districts have the right to question and investigate, or they use that kind of verbiage to
Like within
determine.
reason, professional judgment. I remember we read it.
Yeah.
That'd be great if you could do that, Rollins. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not in violation of that if we do move to like a JV thing, specifically for the seniors. I think we would be fine for underclassmen to say, we're giving you eligibility, but we're basically saying you have to file the hardship and you have to let us dig if you're a senior. And I just want to make sure we're not violating any,
Or you have to use your one-time transfer,
yeah.
which is perfectly fine. If they want to do that, then it's not the homeless issue. It's you're using your one-time transfer.
But that's, I guess, kind of my other question on it is we're not allowing the one-time transfer for shared housing, temporary guardians. So we almost could say, because you're not meeting the guardianship and or residency requirements, that they can't use their one-time transfer. Because I think that too would curb some of what this issue is.
Yeah, you're not eligible for the waiver.
Yeah.
According to NAT code, whatever.
Yep.
And I think that makes sense to do that because it's so similar to what you're saying, Kate.
Yeah, we still have our guardianship. We still have our residency rights. You can't use one-time transfer for any other situation with those. I think this falls under that. But yeah, I think if we do a little bit more digging to make sure we're not violating anything by saying JV, I definitely think it's a conversation we continue, because I think it will help a lot of what we're seeing going on. And it's clearly word's getting around. It's happening more rampant across the country, obviously. So it's not, I don't think it's going to go away. And it's better that we're kind of getting ahead of it before it becomes even more rampant.
Well, what about Clark County's legal? What would they say? I mean, is this something, Paul, that you think I should take to, once it's written and we discuss it specifically, that I go take that to legal and
Well,
show them that?
what I'd like to see what you have, Rollins, and I can look at it and give you.
Okay.
And then if Washoe has another opinion, we can discuss that. But if I'm okay with it as counsel to the NIAA, then I think we should do it.
Okay, well, I'll send you over what I had from the convention and see what you say.
Yeah, because I don't want to get into a debate with.
Sure, exactly. And again, my interpretation of that paragraph might be different from yours. So,
but we've talked about it, Rollins. We all met, you, me, and Lori, and I read the same thing. And I do remember it. I don't remember the word for word. I probably have it in my files, but it was something along the lines of, like professional judgment, whatever. Be cautious in the questioning, but you can ask some questions. Okay. Any other thoughts on this topic? I think it's definitely something we want to bring back and continue for our next meeting for sure.
Yes.
Definitely want to bring it back.
He's not going to let this one go. As you shouldn't.
No,
Okay.
No, and I think the more clear guidelines we have from the NIAA, the easier it is to have those conversations. And I mean, Kate, me, I'm working on building that relationship with Kelly, and we had a good one the other day where she helped me out a lot and answered some questions that we were able to get a kid approved. But there's times too where she's like pushing back. You can't, like, why do you want an eviction notice? Kelly, how do you know that they're not living there?
Right. Yeah, and I that's the hardest part, I think, is the two worlds, like in a big district like that, two worlds kind of, and not seeing eye to eye on some of this stuff because they're not seeing the other side that we're seeing. And it's tough because we don't want to dig when a kid is going through something, but we want to also keep the integrity of the program so that it's not
the integrity of the program, and then also, from a public school standpoint, protecting the seats and the roster spots for the kids who belong at the school. And that's the conversation I have with Kelly. Like, yeah, if they're legitimately should be, homeless and need to be there, then yes, they should get that roster spot. But if not, they're taking a spot away from a kid who lived down the block from the school and doesn't have a choice but to go to that school and play basketball there.
Yep, 100% agree with you. Yeah, and I think part of the problem is we don't have anything in writing. So it's just determined based on, the McKinney-Vento and that they're allowed to play. That's all we go by for athletic. We have nothing in our regulations at all about students in these situations. So yeah, we'll bring it back for sure. If you have other thoughts or you talk to other people, bring those thoughts to the next meeting so we can keep this conversation going and figure out a path forward for it. All right, moving on to item 8, incoming freshman residency changes. Jim had brought this up 2 meetings ago. It's something him and I kind of talked about. It's something I know Clark County School District does. If you move between 8th and 9th grade, and or if we just have no verification in their system of where you went for 8th grade, they're required to submit that to the Clark County School District so that they can vet that student, see if they're a transfer, get documented abandonment if they've moved, all of that good stuff, get a transcript to see did they do 2 years of 8th grade. That is not happening across the board for all of our schools in the whole state. I think that's an inequity that we need to fix. And I know Jim's experiencing some issues in Wattel up there, moving the movement out of his school, losing kids between 8th and 9th grade. So I think that was kind of part of the reason this was being brought up. So yeah, I'm going to open it up first, Jim, if you want to talk a little bit on this, and then we can kind of discuss what possibly this wouldn't really necessarily need to be a regulation change per se. It could just be a logistical thing in Activate where it's just they're being submitted for review, similar to how we do with incoming freshmen whose parents are not together. It's more of just a verification. It's not necessarily a transfer. So it could just be verifying your address is, legit, basically. So go ahead, Jim, if you want to talk on this at all. And if not,
Yeah, I don't know if this is just a Wattel problem, but kids have been leaving after 8th grade here. They attend K through 8 in Zephyr Cove, and then they'll go across state lines to South Tahoe. So we've lost a ton of kids over the years, and there's nothing there's no penalty for them that they get automatic eligibility as a freshman. So I just wonder if there's something we can put in place. Number one, there should be something to prevent them from being able to do that. But I don't want to create a whole bunch of work for it's usually the secretaries having to check the residency. And is anybody else experiencing this, or is anybody hearing about it? I know what's unique about this is we have a state line in between us, so their kids can't come over here. They have to be a resident in Nevada to go to attend school here. Not the same going the other way. So that's one of the reasons why we're losing so many and not gaining any. And I don't know if Incline and North Tahoe have that issue. It doesn't seem like it because their numbers seem to be staying pretty level.
yeah, I mean, so there's some protections when you're talking about those kids that stay there and then go out of zone. They should be on those out of zone variances getting the JV only, but that's going to change with the one-time transfer. So now it's even more incentive to leave because now they're going to get full eligibility as a freshman where they wouldn't have normally got that. But even so, just the verification, because I know you and I talked about somewhere where like, did they really move? They claim they now live there, but they still, I know they, I see the younger kid over here, like they have a younger kid at this school, but they're saying, they got an address over here. So more of just the looking into addresses and getting the verification if they did move, that they actually legitimately moved. That's not happening. They're just getting an address and they're at South Tahoe, and nobody's looking at it a little bit deeper sometimes.
Well, technically, they don't even have to move. They can, from what I understand, is kids can go to South Lake High School. They can pay the tuition, which is supposedly around 10 grand. They can provide proof that they work in California a certain amount of hours a week, and they can go there for nothing, or they can move. And so it's just tough for us to keep kids. I mean, we don't offer the programs because we don't have the kids. If we had the kids, we can offer the programs.
Right.
So again, I don't know if this is just a Wattel problem.
It's absolutely not, Jim. I mean, in Clark County, it's different issues, right? Where schools aren't losing programs because of it, but we definitely have a lot of kids moving schools, and we have a lot to our in X zone in 8th grade and then are suddenly over at school Y. And then for 10th grade are back in the house in school X's zone, because school Y didn't double check addresses, because their infinite campus said both parents of the house. They answered both parents of the house, so that it wasn't flagged for any other reason. I know Kate and I just met a couple weeks ago and we talked about, for Clark County, trying to add in our activate questions next year, a have you moved in the last 12 months? And that way anybody who's moved will get flagged on that, because it's, well, yes, Kate said we ask our schools, hey, if they've moved, flag their account, send it in. If they, if they didn't attend 8th grade in our district, flag it, send it in. Unfortunately, not all schools do that. So I find ones where schools approved it when it's something that we would have wanted to approve. So, adding that requirement that, hey, no matter your grade, if you've moved in the last 12 months, write us some documentation so we can verify, would definitely be helpful in cutting that down. And it makes it, in our school district, would make it more equal, that all schools don't have the choice to review it themselves, but it has to come through our office.
Right.
Yeah, not that this is what this specific conversation initially started about, because it's really about like the residency and moving for that. The other good benefit, if we are pushing those through where, you're getting a kid that has not been at your feeder school, so you can't see them, you don't know where they came from, is requiring that 9th grader to provide their middle school transcript to really catch all those repeat 8th graders. Because again, I think Clark County School District, Washoe County School District have, because they are, a lot of kids are coming in and they're seeing those transcripts and stuff a lot more. They see that, but I worry at private charters, some of our smaller school districts, they're getting brand new kids in 9th grade and they don't even realize that kid, has taken, high school credit somewhere else and, out of state, or they went to a different charter.
Or, yeah, or even that they were a 9th grade. We just had one, Christy just caught one that the school kid came in from out of state, told the registrar, hey, he 8th grade last year, 9th grade.
I will.
They didn't ask for any verification. And then when he did athletic verification, Christy said, hey, wait, I need the previous transcript, and find out the kid was in 9th grade all last year out of state. So now he should be a 10th grader, and they've got to fix his cohort and everything because the registrar took him at their word.
Yeah, so much of this is just, I really think, more on the activate side of things. They're not really going to be considered transfers because our transfer rules start when they enter 9th grade, but we could still do that same non-transfer residence verification and just kind of add a couple questions there that require, all of those incoming 9th graders to provide their 8th grade transcript. You as a school can just say, oh, I don't need it because you've been here since 6th grade. I can see your transcript, or a school district could say, we don't need it for those ones that, have been in our school district this whole time. But at least that option to upload the transcript is there for every single 9th grader. The option to upload a document of abandonment if they've moved in the past 12 months, adding those questions and those requirements will, I think, just help statewide keep it kind of consistent so that we're catching anything going on with residence changes, and obviously the have you attended, 9th grade or 2 years of 8th grade, and kind of catching those issues across the state as well, since I don't know that that's necessarily happening at every school. So I think that's really where we kind of can make the change. I don't think a regulation change would need to happen. It's not going to, no matter what we do, unfortunately, for like Whittel's case, we can't make a student ineligible for going to a school out of zone in 9th grade if our regulations allow for students to go out of zone. Like, you're going to lose those kids if South Tahoe allows them to come from out of zone, and they do. And we can't really limit how a school allows students to enroll. That's not really our jurisdiction. So unless we went back and said, no, you can't attend out of zone, which I don't know that we'd have support across the state for something like that, since we do utilize that a lot across the state as students attending out of zone. I don't know that Whittel is going to be able to fight that piece of it. The only thing I could say is if there's some sketchiness going on regarding like addresses and residency and guardianship, it could definitely get caught between 8th and 9th grade if they're going from, your schools to South Tahoe school. So I think this at least can catch some of it. It's not going to fix the kids getting signed off on the out of zone waivers that they allow. That part kind of out of our control a little bit, unfortunately.
So that there's that, but also, and this is a question I had for Jim, are they being recruited over there by South Tahoe?
I don't have proof,
We're
but
on the record.
in some cases, not all, not all.
You hear things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without doubt.
So that's another avenue. I mean, I think for Watell, because it really is unfair if kids can go from Nevada to California with no problem, but it doesn't work the other way. I mean, that's that's a school that's dying on the vine if those kids are going to continue to go, right, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, we have kids in the elementary and middle school on our middle school basketball team. Their older siblings went here, and then they're playing over there. It's hard to stomach. Parents drop them off. I know they live here in Nevada, but it doesn't matter. There's no penalty. There's nothing.
Yeah, and the proving of recruiting is one of the hardest things to do without texts, phone calls, pictures.
Yeah, and
Actually
again,
coach those kids.
I'm sure that there's some recruiting going on, but it's not all of them are being recruited.
Yeah. They're just seeing the opportunity there.
Exactly.
It's close enough where there's like, oh, they have the sports I want to play. And
right.
Yeah, it's tough. Because it's
So
only, you can't field those sports.
Yeah, so like our 7th grade class now is 26, our 8th grade's 30. And so far they've verbally said that they're planning on coming back. So things are looking up for us, but
that's good.
Heard that before. And
yeah.
Well, we'll see the first day of school next year.
Yep.
So.
All right. Any other comments about this? I think we can bring this one back too and just maybe talk more specifically on some questions that we want, possibly added to activate if we feel like we need to bring it back. I mean, I think we got a pretty good idea of where we could tweak a couple things to help this. So we might just go ahead and make those changes because I don't think this needs to really be a regulation change or anything that gets approved by like the Board of Control. I think it's more of just logistically how we process, student registrations, right, Paul? You don't see a need to really make any major changes to anything. It's just, additional documents we may ask for, which we have the right to do in certain cases.
And yeah, I think you can do, like you say, that through Activate. And then, like I say, I think there are existing regulations that could apply. I know recruiting is hard to approve, but if that is going on, I think Watell could certainly file a complaint with the NIAA against South Tahoe, and that'd be looked into.
Yeah.
So, that's as an example.
Okay. I might just draft up a couple additional questions and kind of talk to Rollins and Grandy, since we're all kind of handling this at the district level, and what we see and Activate, and come up with some questions that make sense and bring that back just for you guys to review. Because I do think that can help statewide if we're consistent with how we treat those incoming 9th graders. Anything else for that before we move on? All right, item 9 is future planning. Are there any topics, items, regulations, policies, questions, comments, things that you want to add to talk about for our next meeting?
Kate, I know I'm not on the committee, but I would like to add one. The fine structure. You know how I feel about that. I don't think $100 is enough of a pinch, if you will, because $100 is not what $100 was before. And I think we need to look at our fine structure. I'd also like the committee to take a look at repeat offenders and how we're tracking and what we can do about regulation for people who are continually violating similar regulations over and over again. How far back we want to carry those, and maybe there's some language there we want to address. I know those are probably two left field comments, but you know where I'm at on that. We had that conversation.
Yep. Absolutely. We'll add those. Anybody else?
Yeah, similar to Tim's, I think one thing that I'd like to either get more well versed on as a newbie here, or just maybe some changes is how a school goes about reporting something that might be in violation of NIAA rules. Like even something as small as not having jersey numbers on a roster or having the wrong jersey numbers on a roster. I certainly don't want to be the school that's like tattling on every school, right? And I don't want to get into, I just don't want to get into that sort of position. But at the same time, I know my coaches work really hard to try to meet all the deadlines and get the jersey numbers correctly and get all the things in order. And my department works really hard. And then so when a team shows up and they have zeros across the board on their roster, and it's like, well, what are we doing here then? If we can just kind of do that, then and again, I don't want to get people in trouble. I understand how everything, happens and things go, but I just either get more well versed in how to report, or is there some sort of anonymity? That's the wrong way to say that, in reporting, or just thoughts, questions, advice on how to do that.
No, I love that conversation. I think it's important. I can tell you on my end, I do verify rosters. So as I'm going through, like, when they have their first game, I will email, if I see, obviously if somebody's missing and there's ineligible participation, it's a forfeiture, it's fine, all that good stuff. But smaller things like jersey numbers and positions, the precedent has been that they are not fined and they're just kind of like, hey, get this done. But we can always look at, do we want to stick with that? Your roster is not technically done if it doesn't have what we require. So we could be more strict on that and impose the fine for the jersey numbers and the positions as well. We're not, above doing something like that if it's a widespread problem. And I can tell you from looking at winter rosters, we do have a good handful that have not done the jersey numbers and the positions. And it's annoying because it's extra work for all of us to have to check on that things when we give, the deadline. So I'm in support of that, and I would definitely entertain the conversation. So I'll bring that up for the next meeting for sure. Others?
Can I tag on to what Cy just said in regards to the numbers and stuff like that? I know one of the things that is always promoted with not only the NIAA meetings, but the preseason rule meetings is with max preps, scores, updated information. When I was coaching, I would go on if I'm getting close to playoffs and I wanted to kind of get a gauge of what possibly would be going into either the South or some of the northern teams. There were no stats at all. There was no wins and losses, or there was maybe like 2 games put in there. And we always are reminded, you've got 24 hours to get your stuff up. And I don't know, again, I'm also a newbie, Cy, so I'm right there with you, but with that fining, does that actually take place, or is there a fine if you don't keep up with your max preps? I know for us as ADs, we also get talked about a lot about final forms now, making sure coaches are this, that, and the other thing. But when we look at max preps, it just kind of seems like that, unfortunately, I know coaches have a lot, but it's one of those things that, is a requirement as a coach is you need to keep up with your max preps, your scores, your rosters, your stats, and stuff like that. So maybe that can be tied into that as well.
Definitely.
Hey, if you don't mind, I want to jump in on that real quick, if you don't mind. I agree with you 100%. Matter of fact, this morning, Bart Davis and I were texting back and forth yesterday without giving any names. We had a score reported in max preps as one school winning. We were looking at schools with exorbitant scores, running it up. Let's just be honest. And one school was in there yesterday having a score of 67-0 against one team. And they were in there again for the same day with a score of 73-0 against another team, which means they were in there twice, scoring 140 points, but they were listed twice against 2 different opponents. I agree. We've got to figure out a way of getting that in there to make sure we're holding them accountable for that, because that's important, especially with realignment coming down the pike. There was discussion of using max preps as a source. And if we're going to use it, we have got to ensure it's accurate, correct, updated input. And I hate to say it, I mean, Bart Davis can't sit there all day long and keep refreshing to keep these going. We need to make sure we're holding our membership accountable for that. And I agree. It's an issue and we need to address it. They are our official stat keeper for the state of Nevada. and we need to make sure we're officially using it. So I appreciate that. And I think it's something we can discuss at looking in our regulations as to how we enforce that as well.
I have a
Agreed.
question on that, Tim.
Yeah,
Who controls Max Preps as far as giving out logins?
Max Preps does. Anybody can get that. That's the issue we run into. We
Okay.
have to go back and recertify all of the scores. You and I can go in and we can update any score from them because they take it from all these sources, which was the concern I addressed with the board back when I talked about using them as the official scorekeeper, because
Right.
you have people that just go in and do it. So I don't know if there's a way to ramp that down or throttle it down a little. But it is a concern that we have. I don't know if this isn't the forum for that, Tammy, but I will continue that conversation with you.
Well, because
without a
that's
doubt.
one of those things I would just feel like I wouldn't feel comfortable imposing any kind of sanctions to anybody when anybody can go in and score.
Yeah, like who are we going to sanction on this one? I mean, are we going to sanction the school that put in the score correctly, the school that put in the score incorrectly, or the school that didn't know who they were playing? I mean,
Right.
or where
That's
they
my
were
only
playing, 'cause
concern
one was
with
home
that.
and one was away. I mean, so
Yeah.
it's all over the place. I get it, but I agree that here's what my pontification comes from is this. We have a lot of things that we've just accepted as inaccurate or inadequate
Mhm.
as a state association. We've just accepted it. We can't get this done. We are trying as a staff to start saying, no, we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and that accountability is going to filter out. Which I love the fact that Bart and Kate spend so much time roster verification, officials assignments, with the coaches certifications and all of that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for our staff, and we're going to keep working on that, and that's a drive we have. And as we continue to build capacity, which is what we're trying to do now, is build more capacity, we're going to add things. And hopefully one of those things is that accountability. Donnie had made a mention in a hearing about a year and a half ago about a compliance officer at every school. And it was a tongue-in-cheek statement, but it was so truthful in the fact that we need compliance officers to monitor all of these things. Somebody who can get up in the morning and say, my number one duty is to make sure all the games from last night have been uploaded to Max Preps correctly. Somebody who can get up in the morning and say, we need X, Y, and Z, but we have to get to capacity. And when we get to fuller capacity, we're going to be able to start doing these things. But if we can start that grassroots in this group by saying, listen, we have regulations that require you to do it, let's get it done right. I think we're in a good place, and it's a good place to start.
Well, if I can just add on to that, with the advance of technology in regards to certain sports, for me, I use Game Changer for multiple years, and it's syncs with Max Preps. And as soon as you hit exit, your game is already loaded, stats are done, everything's taken care of. Max Preps provides for football a stat sheet that you can write down, and it's very self-explanatory on how to enter those stats in at the end of the game. So that's where my concern is just as even a coach. I'm just like, we're told this. Now that I'm an AD, I get on my coaches all the time of we need to get these games in, but then we check Max Preps for other schools and they're lacking all this stuff before we even get to the playoffs. So it just becomes an issue of accountability. Like you said, I mean, it'd be nice to have somebody that would be assigned to, look at it as a part of their job going forward. But when does that happen, and who do you hire at your individual schools to do that?
Well, one last thing I'll kind of just say on this, because obviously we'll talk about it more at the next meeting, is some of this I think goes towards Tim's idea of like the coaching education and the training and getting coaches. Like some coaches might not know that. They don't know, these programs that you're using, and it's just the communication piece. And we will get there. We'll definitely get there, and that'll hopefully help too. Holding them accountable, giving them the resources they need, and then.
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate that. And the other thing is, I want to stress this as well. Coach Reamer, they're fortunate. You were a coach and you moved into that role, and you're able to handle that and do it. One of the things I think we face is systemically across Nevada, we have had a migration of administrators and athletic directors that were in silos as to what they had experience doing. And in those silos, they never experienced what you're discussing there. They never had that administrator or that athletic director that was on them to get this thing done, that it became a part of their DNA, for lack of a better term. There's nobody that's on this meeting right now that's sitting here going, how do you not report your scores? We're all like, wait, but what we've realized as we get into these roles is there are a lot of groups of individuals that not only don't know, they've never known, and we've got to make sure we get them to know, because what you're saying is 100% on the nose. It's 100%. We have to make sure they know what their expectation is. They're meeting that expectation, and our office and our association is holding them accountable to those expectations. So we'll get there. I promise. It's one of my top priorities.
All right, any other topics for next meeting? Good. All right, public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or seem to be personal attacks will not be permitted. Double checking that there is no one there in the NIAA office.
There is no one here. Rollins, please stay on after to have a good discussion real quick about something else.
All right, no one's here. So we'll